Would you believe that meatloaf is one of America's most popular dishes? When I searched up what were the most popular recipes that people were looking up, meatloaf was very high on the list. So I thought I would make one of those today. I'm Heather. I'm from Cookbook Kitchenette, and this is where I review vintage cookbooks and I create recipes from these cookbooks. So for today, I've got a Campbell's cookbook. So this one is cooking with soup. And I've gotten this one, it looks like I got this one at Value Village in 2010. So I even have had this about 15 years myself. But this is from 1978. So you can see there's some pictures, there's some drawings. There's a lot of great stuff in here about cooking with condensed soups. So because this is from 1978, meatloaf, of course, meatloaf spans the eras. Almost every single cookbook I have, doesn't matter what decade it's from, it has a meatloaf recipe in it. So this one actually has 4 meatloaf recipes in it. Some of them are more traditional. There was a stovetop meatloaf, which they call top stove meatloaf, that had processed cheese slices on top of it. There's an extra saucy meatloaf, and then there's the one that I will be making today, which is a meatloaf roll. So this is the one I'm going to be making today. It's called Roll-in-One Meatloaf. So it uses condensed tomato soup, and then there's ground beef, breadcrumbs, minced onion, chopped parsley, but I'm not adding that because I actually don't like parsley. 1 egg, salt, and then green beans. So it calls for frozen cut green beans, but I have canned green beans, so I'm just going to drain them and use those and maybe dry them off a bit, so hopefully that works. So follow along. I'm going to wash my hands, I'm going to put my hair up, and then we'll get to cooking. We'll cook this roll-in-one meatloaf, which is like a stuffed meatloaf. Follow along. So here is the 1970s Cooking with Soup Campbell's cookbook. I am going to flip to the page here. You can see there's a few different hamburger recipes, but we're doing the roll-in-one meatloaf. So as mentioned, this is how we're starting. It called for 1.5 pounds of ground beef. It called for 1/2 cup of fine breadcrumbs, 1/4 cup minced onion, mine are not quite minced, but 1 egg, and then 1 package of green beans. So I just used a can of green beans. So I started off breaking up the ground beef. In this bowl, I just have to mention, I love this bowl that I've got the ground beef in. It's a new melamine bowl that, I mean, it's not new, it's vintage, but I picked it up at the thrift store last week, and it's turquoise and it's big, and I love melamine because it's Canadian made. So I used 1/2 can of tomato condensed soup in here. Again, to make it less wet, I guess, I would have used less of the soup in the mixture and more, make sure it's more dry with the breadcrumbs. So I've mixed in my breadcrumbs, my onion, mix it all together. I cracked an egg, so you can mix the egg a little bit beforehand. And then the rest of the breadcrumbs go into that mixture. Once it's all mixed together like a meatball texture, of course you have to season it. I like a lot of pepper, and my pepper container is not great, so I just went freeform there. So next up you get parchment paper, and you spread out your meatloaf mixture into a square. It said to mix it out in a 12 by 9 square shape. I don't really know what that means, so I just tried to make it an even square where every section was even with each other, and make it also a size that would fit inside the pan that I was using. So the next step would be to take the canned green beans, which I dried off. And I had to drain them and dry them a little bit more because the ones underneath were still damp. But you cover your square with those green beans. And then you press them into the meat so they don't go spilling out. I'm also going to mention I cut out sections here, but I do wash my hands between touching raw meat and touching other things. So you should do that too. So anyways, here I go seasoning that again with my silly little pepper, salt. Okay, so then I sort of made it more of an exact square, and you're supposed to use the parchment paper to help you roll it into a roll fashion. And I think you're supposed to do this as tight as you possibly can. That way it keeps its shape as a meatloaf. It could be I have too many beans in here. I'm not sure exactly. Their recipe from 1970. I'm not sure how many beans that would be. It just said one package, but back then, who knows what one package consisted of. Okay, so I'm pressing the ends and closing them and then trying to compact it more so it's actually like a meatloaf form. I've got my baking dish. You can use like the metal, metal loaf pans too. I know a lot of recipes call for that, but this just said baking dish, so that's what I used. And you're supposed to use the parchment paper to help you put it in the dish. And then I'm just making sure it's properly formed and all the edges are sealed so that my beans are inside. Next up, you're meant to bake at 350 for 40 minutes. After that's done, I would just use a meat thermometer and check the interior of your meatloaf. That way you can be sure it's done before you do the next step, which is putting the last half of the condensed soup can. You put the tomato soup on top as a meatloaf sauce. And at this point, you're also supposed to spoon off any fat that's on the meatloaf. I did not have any because I'm using very lean ground beef. So once you're done that, you put it back in the oven for 10 minutes. And I would say just wait till it's kind of like bubbly and cooked on top. Okay, so there's my meatloaf complete. So I'm all finished with my roll-in-one meatloaf. It didn't exactly stay together. I think I could have compacted it a little bit more and maybe used some more breadcrumbs in it versus more of the soup, and I think that would have held it together better. Also, maybe drying off the green beans a little better would have minimized the moisture that was in it and held it together more. But, I mean, it is soft. Let's try it. It's good. So that is a Campbell cookbook, Cooking with Soup. It hasn't been my favorite recipe, but I think it could be changed a little bit to make it better. And I think I could even make 2 smaller ones because I like my ground beef extra cooked. I like it like not dry, but more on the dry side. So I think if I made 2 minis with this, it would be excellent, and I would like that a lot more. So if you try it, let me know. Let me know what you thought. If you have a meatloaf recipe, I would love to hear if you have any like tips or tricks that you do to make an excellent meatloaf. Please share with me and let me know what you'd like to see next time in terms of like an era, or if there's specific cookbooks that you'd like to learn more about. I'm happy to go through my collection and see what I can find. So be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for following along. See you next time.